Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, October 12th, 2022, and today we are going to be talking about a shift in polling, or at least a bump in polling for the Democratic Party as we head towards the November midterm elections. Now, on your screen, you see a bunch of different polls ranging from Louisiana Senate to Texas Governor to New Hampshire's 1st Congressional District. All across the United States, you see a bunch of different states that are being polled by various pollsters to gauge the political party affiliation and support across party lines across the United States. These polls are quite interesting, to say the least, but as you can tell from the title of this video, we are going to be focused primarily on Senate races, in which the majority of them have shown improvements for the Democratic Party as we head into November. Taking a look at a bunch of the polls that have been released over the past few weeks, in fact, the last week alone in particular, you have seen a bunch of new data come out of the Senate races. The Democrats aren't so lucky when it comes down to the governor races. For instance, as one prime example, we have Warnock up in one poll in the Georgia Senate race, but Brian Kemp, the Republican, winning by 10 points amongst the same exact group. The same people that are saying they will elect Raphael Warnock are the same people saying they will elect Brian Kemp. It's a very interesting dynamic across the state itself, but looking at the Senate races so far, the Democratic Party, surprisingly enough, has had some surprising good amounts of support, with one exception being in the state of Wisconsin, which we will address later down the line. Now, on the general baseline, the Democratic Party is still very much favored to win control of the Senate. The rhetoric on this has shifted because the Republican Party has made minor advancements in terms of their chances at winning control of the Senate, meaning that they end up picking up one seat from the Democratic Party. Now, I still believe the Democratic Party is on track to win control of the Senate, and I really haven't doubted that over the past 2 to 3 months. And the reason for that is because the Republican Party has failed to provide adequate nominees across many of these states when it comes down to this election cycle. We are not in a year where Democrats should be able to retain control of the Senate, especially given where we are in terms of the composition of 50 to 50. Our generic ballot, as it stands right now, is 7 points to the right of the nation as to where it was back in 2018. It's 5 points to the right of the nation of where it was back in 2020. And it is on par with where we were back in 2016. In fact, slightly underperforming for Democrats across the generic ballot. So if we are back in a 2016 type of scenario, might I remind you, that in 2016, the Democrats lost Arizona and Georgia in this exact same Senate class by double digits. Democrats barely held on to New Hampshire, not only barely held on, won it by 0.1%. They flipped the state of New Hampshire and Illinois, but beyond that, Democrats lost in Wisconsin, they lost in Pennsylvania, they lost in North Carolina, they lost in Ohio. They lost practically everywhere beyond Illinois, Nevada, and New Hampshire. Which means if that was to happen now, Republicans would in fact not only have the majority, but have a majority of 52 to 48. And that's obviously something the Democratic Party does not want to happen. But it's something that very well could have happened if the Senate environment was better for the Republican Party. The generic ballot is telling us we are going back in time to a time better for Republicans from 2016. You are talking about, to reiterate, you are talking about us being in a position where the Republicans and Democrats are where they were back in 2016. Not in terms of what was expected to happen in 2016, but what the actual results ended up being. Looking at that and then applying it to our very narrow Senate map, I call into question how Democrats have even reached this point. But a lot of it really just results on the Republican Party's inefficiency at fielding the right candidates and supporting the right candidates, might I add, because I can tell you now, many of the right candidates were on the ballot. Mark Brnovich in Arizona, Dave McCormick in Pennsylvania. There were better nominees that could have taken up this list of a Republican nominee, or this title of Republican nominee, as they headed into November, and would have done significantly better. If I was to look at the generic ballot alone and look at our Senate map right now, I would say, without understanding who was running, Republicans would probably have 85 to 15 in terms of their chances. So the fact remains, the Democrats are the ones who are severely outperforming. And any reduction from that is just getting closer to what should have actually happened. But the problem for the Republican Party is that it's too late. It's too late in many states to change the trajectory of how they're going to go. I want you to take a look at some of the data that we're going to go through, specifically and most prominently in the state of Georgia, which has had a sudden change in heart against not against Reverend Warnock, against Herschel Walker, who came into this race as a celebrity who won his primary after Donald Trump supported him very, very early on. And the results ended up being Warnock now being ahead by 3.3%, despite Walker actually maintaining a lead for a brief period of time and being neck and neck for a pretty substantial period of time as well. Looking at the numbers now, Warnock leads by 3.3% across the state. Looking at the polls from before then, Walker was doing a lot better. Of the four most recent polls, too, in the state of Georgia, this is where you really see a major advancement in favor of the Democrats. Let's go line by line. The four that are being averaged here, Trafalgar, Quinnipiac, Emerson, and Insider Advantage. Trafalgar has Warnock up by 1. The most recent poll from them, done back in August, has Walker up by 1. That's a 2-point improvement, not super substantial, but it's the difference between a Democratic victory and a Republican victory. Quinnipiac University, Warnock ahead by 7, he was ahead by 6. Not much of a change, but still an improvement regardless, when Republicans were supposed to be the ones shoring it up in time for the election. It becomes more prominent when you take a look at the Hill and Emerson College. Warnock's winning by 2, according to Emerson. In the most recent Emerson poll, Walker was up by 2. That's a 4-point swing. And the biggest one we've seen thus far is Fox 5 and Insider Advantage, which shows Warnock ahead by 3, when previously, in the most recent poll from September, showed Walker ahead by 3. That is a 6-point swing. You can also see it in other polls if you go down. For instance, Survey USA, Warnock plus 12, it was Warnock plus 9. Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Warnock plus 3 was Walker plus 2. Fox News, what was Warnock plus 4 is now still Warnock plus 4. And this was before the scandal actually released. So in all of the post-scandal polls, whether that be a day of gauging it or more recently, there has been an improvement for Democrats. But it doesn't exactly just end there. Maggie Hassan has just received her most favorable poll in quite some time, in a few weeks now, that shows her ahead by 7 points across the state of New Hampshire. Now, I expect that to be what our final result ends up being, though I would not be shocked if it got closer. I would be shocked if Maggie Hassan lost, but it doesn't look like any of the data seems to be indicating that that is in fact going to be the case. In fact, Trafalgar, which is known for its overwhelming Republican bias, shows the Republicans losing this race by 3 points. You can see St. Anselm College, which is New Hampshire's mainstream pollster, shows Maggie Hassan ahead by 6. And Fabrizio and Anzalone, I believe that's how you say it. If it's incorrect, please tell me down below, shows Maggie Hassan ahead by 7. Altogether, some pretty favorable results for the Democrat here versus 2016 that actually said the Republican was going to win. So it's not always the best indicator when it comes down to New Hampshire polling. In fact, overestimates Republican support. It doesn't end here. Colorado has seen a number of polls come out showing Michael Bennet ahead. This was a Republican target. Again, even Trafalgar says that Michael Bennett's going to win by about 6 points. You know, Michael Bennett's probably going to win somewhere around 7 to 8 points. You're not talking a 2020 type of margin, what was 13.5. Joe O'Dea is also an individually strong Republican nominee, and that comes through when it comes down to election data. But right now, Michael Bennet is pulling ahead, and the data reaffirms that time and time again. In Ohio, the most recent poll that we have seen is a Republican internal that shows J.D. Vance ahead by 2. Siena College did a poll, however, that shows Tim Ryan ahead by 3. Marist College says Ryan is losing by 1. Emerson says Vance wins by 4. Suffolk University says Ryan wins by 1. And Trafalgar says that Vance wins by 5. You know what number hasn't been reached? 2020's number of Trump plus 8.4%. Even Trafalgar back in 2020 said that Trump was going to win by 5 points across the state. He ended up winning by 8.2%. Ohio really didn't get that much polling back in 2020. When you take a look at a lot of the data that was released, you barely saw any in the final month. In the entire month of October, you're talking about 10 to 12 polls. This is a state that would receive 2 to 3 a day back in 2004 and 2008, and that's because Ohio, number one, was historically polled wrong back in 2016, but also because Democrats really weren't vying for Ohio the same way they are right now. I will also say that depending on the type of year, Ohio can be competitive. In 2018, Ohio did go to the Democrats on the Senate level and almost went to them on the governor level. That in itself is quite impressive for the Democratic Party, considering they had lost the state by 8 points just 2 years prior. I still think J.D. Vance wins this race. I don't think it's going to be tilt. I think it's going to be lean Republican at most for the Democratic Party. But the numbers that show Tim Ryan only losing by 2 or being up in some cases by 3 is quite a good result. Because in any type of normal reality, given our national environment, given Ohio's voting history, electoral composition, this should be a state that Republicans were winning by 10 to 12 points. Instead, they're ahead by just 1.4. And as been the theme throughout all of these states, we aren't done yet. Let's take a look at the state of Arizona, where a new poll actually was released, which is not on 538 just yet, but OH Predictive Insights that shows Mark Kelly with a 13-point lead against Blake Masters across the state. That's not going to happen. I entirely doubt that, but I do think that Mark Kelly winning by a larger margin than what he had back in 2020 could in fact be the case. Polling in Arizona is a bit weird. In 2020, it said President Biden would win by about 0.9. He won by 0.3. In 2016, it said Trump would win by 4. He won by 3.5. In the Senate race, however, it was a bit different. Mark Kelly was supposed to win by 5.6, and he won by 2.4. A swing like that still gives him the victory, but it's still closer than it was back in 2020. But I am reminded of where it was back in 2018, when it said Martha McSally would win by 1 point. You hear the voice crack because my voice isn't fully back, but it sounds pretty good, hopefully. But Mark Kelly won this race in 2020, but against the same opponent that ran in 2018, Martha McSally, who was leading by 1 point on Election Day, ended up losing by 2.3. So depending on the year, depending on the candidate, sometimes these polls overestimate Democrats or Republicans. But regardless, even if you take the most substantial shift from 2016 until now and apply that against Mark Kelly, he still ends up winning. That in itself tells me that he's on track to do just that. And new numbers out of the state reaffirm that expectation from CNN, Fox News, Marist College, CBS, wherever you look, Mark Kelly is up. And in the final state we're going to take a look at is the state of Nevada, a state that has been long pursued by the Republican Party after it was won in 2016 by just 2.4% by Catherine Cortez Masto. Adam Laxalt used to serve as the Attorney General across the state of Nevada. He really doesn't have as much baggage as I would say Herschel Walker or Dr. Oz does, but he definitely has baggage that comes with his campaign. The good news for the GOP is that running a candidate who has already won a statewide elected position, who ran for governor back in 2018, is that most of the opposition research that has already been done has already been released against this candidate. And the reason for that is because, again, they have already put themselves out in such a vulnerable position that the opposition research needed to be done 4 years ago. It needed to be done 8 years ago, and it was already done and ran, and voters have already heard it, and in some cases still chosen to vote for him, despite hearing about these claims. So them being resurged back up to 2022 puts the Republican Party in a position where it's just old attacks. Not much really has changed between 4 years ago and now, especially on regards of Adam Laxalt, who hasn't been serving in public office. Adam Laxalt has had some really good news. When it comes down to a lot of the polling data that's been out of the state, he's been leading pretty consistently. In fact, Catherine Cortez Masto has not led in a single poll since mid-August of 2022, which means right now, Laxalt has maintained a lead and on the average is ahead by 1.7%. The only difference now is that a brand new poll from USA Today and Suffolk University have given Catherine Cortez Masto her first lead in about 2 months. That in itself tells me that there is something a little bit different about the race right now than where it was previously, than where it was a week ago. That Catherine Cortez Masto now leads by 2 points isn't enough to sway the overall average and very well could be an outlier, but I do think that it is an indicator of something. And looking at the historical accuracy of these polls, the Republican Party probably doesn't want to hear this, but the polls typically overestimate Republican support when it comes down to the state, except for the case of 2020. Let me show you what I mean. Back in 2020, Biden was supposed to win by 2.4%. He ended up winning by 2.7%. It's a narrow underestimation for the Democratic Party, but still technically an underestimation. Trafalgar said that Trump would win by 1. He lost the race. But in 2018 and 2016, it was much more apparent. In 2016, Cortez Masto was supposed to win by 1.8. She ended up winning by 2.4. Larger than 2020, but it gets worse. In 2016, Hillary Clinton was supposed to lose the state to Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton ended up winning it by 2.4. That's a swing over 3 points in favor of the Democratic Party's direction. Looking at the Senate race, governor's race back in 2018, Adam Laxalt, the same one who is leading right now, was meant to win by 1. He lost by 4. And in the Senate race, you can actually see here, I don't know why it didn't show up. Maybe it didn't treat it as a competitive race, but it absolutely was. The Senate race in 2018, Jackie Rosen was supposed to tie with Dean Heller, the Republican incumbent. Trafalgar said Dean Heller would win by 3. He ended up losing by 5. So when I look at the numbers from the state of Nevada, I was already apprehensive on the front that I don't think Adam Laxalt has this monumental 2, 3, 4-point lead. And I say monumental knowing Nevada's history of practically never voting for a Republican. But looking at the spread here, if Catherine Cortez Masto is leading in a poll, that's an indicator of a turning of the tides. It might change. It might only be a 1 week off thing. It might be an outlier. But I will say that historically polls have always underestimated Democrats in Nevada, especially the ones that have taken up the most weight when it comes down to the numbers we're looking at now. And to see new data out of the state showing the Democrats ahead tells me a lot of good news for the Democratic Party in conjunction with practically every other state that has polled the races right now beyond the state of Wisconsin. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.